what is the way of missions? We've been sent by our church, the Ark, to accomplish its vision, which is to multiply loving communities in the power of the Spirit here in Tepito. That's the goal. And basically that means church planting. And for us specifically, we have a focus on young people, marginalized young people who are at risk to getting involved in gangs, that kind of thing. And our kind of job is to do that here, but also cascade the learning back for the Ark back in Bromley. So what are we learning? Like, what is the way of missions? And this is a bit of a like Sunday school answer. I know this, but I'll unpack it. The way is Jesus. Jesus said, I'm the way and the truth and the life. And there's a verse that I kind of want to use to kind of explain this a little bit. It's in Hebrews chapter 12. And it says this: keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, because he's the author and the finisher of your faith. He's the beginning and the end. He's the one who inspires it. He's the one who completes it, carries it on to perfection. And this work of mission that we're involved in here in Tepito, definitely Jesus started it. Most of you that know me know the story of how I was walking along a street in Bromley, pastor of the church in Bromley, and the street kind of disappears, and suddenly I can see all these markets, tianguis, I've discovered they're known as, here in Tepito, and there's this gang of young people approaching me to rob me. And I have this thought like, if God's not called me to Mexico, I'm not safe here. And then the vision ends, I look on the other side of the road and there's a guy wearing this t-shirt thing that says Mexico on it, which is a bit of a weird coincidence. But weirder still, 2 weeks after that, I'm walking with a guy called Steve Hurst, one of the elders in the church, one of my friends, in the park in Bromley. And after I finished telling him this story about this vision of young people trying to rob me in Mexico, some young people actually try to rob us in Bromley, and they surround us and they say, where are you from? What are you going to give us? And one of them pulls a knife, and crazily I say, well, I am going to give you something. I give my testimony, I share the gospel, and long story short, we end up praying with all of them. One of them just starts crying. It was just a really beautiful moment. And after we send them away, Steve turns to me, he says, John, is this normal? And I'm like, well, no. Does this normally happen to you? And I'm like, well, no. And he said, look, it's really obvious God's calling you to Mexico and he's going to protect you there. You're going to be safe there. So this whole calling to Tepito, it began with Jesus. But what we're learning out here is it's not enough to begin with him. We have to keep our eyes fixed on him every single moment. And I want to give you some of the reasons why. One of the reasons is, like Paul says, missions is really a spiritual war. You can see that in Ephesians 6, but throughout the New Testament, it's explained. 2 Corinthians, Paul says, the God of this age has blinded their eyes, and otherwise they would believe. And so when you're going on missions, you're actually going against spiritual powers that people would see. And see the reality of the truth of the gospel of the God who created us and loved us and died for us. So there's this spiritual warfare sort of part of it. And we're not going to win that unless our eyes are fixed on Jesus. Like, one of the things that we've been doing is going to these worship nights with YWAM that happen on a Friday night, different part of the city. And in one of those worship nights, I had this like open vision, and I saw this demonic being that was kind of like a king over this part of the city. Like, he was all black, and I don't mean like African skin tone black, I mean like shadow black, like black arms, black legs, black head, black crown. And he was watching us, watching to see what we would do so he could stop us and defeat us. And it reminded me of the story of Balaam and Balak. You know, like how children of Israel in the Old Testament, they're following God. They're following him into their destiny, into their calling. And the king of one of the areas that they're going through, king of Moab, he sees them and he hires this guy Balaam to come and curse them. And it doesn't work. And like, that super encourages me. Actually, like, Tepito, where we're living, is famous as being one of the place where Santa Muerte was first worshipped in public. Santa Muerte is like the kind of god of the cartels. It's basically the spirit of death. It's a skeleton that they put in a dress and they bow down and worship this thing. And obviously, you worship death, you sow to death, you reap death. And there's other spiritual things going on here as well. There's a temple to Satan and all kinds of altars, all kinds of things. And so we're not naive, but we remember that story when Balaam came to curse Israel. What came out of his mouth was blessing. We're protected as long as we remain under the blessing of God. And when the curse didn't work, here's what happened with Balaam and Balak. They sent in women to seduce the Israelites into sexual sin, which happened. Those Israelites then ended up dying and never fulfilled destiny, never fulfilled their mission. And so our understanding here is purity is so key. And actually, I want to say, if you're listening to this in Bromley, purity is key for fulfilling destiny, because when we step out of the ways of God, we open the door to the enemy, and then he comes in to kill us and destroy us and steal from us and do what he's good at. And missionaries, statistically, many missionaries fail on the mission field, not because of problems with the work, but because of breakdown in relationships, because of problems with each other, these things that happen which really come from an impure heart. And so how do we keep ourselves pure? Literally, the markets here, you can buy anything. You can buy body parts. You can buy armaments if you know the right people. You can buy designer cocaine that's flavored. Just crazy temptations. And as well as that, there are these areas where there's pornography, there's prostitution, there's so-called love hotels where you pay by the hour. And so like that spiritual atmosphere is strong. How do you keep your imagination pure living in an environment like that? And the answer's there in that Hebrew verse, keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. Like Peter, who, he could walk on water as long as his eyes were focused on Jesus. But when he looks and starts looking at anything other than Jesus, looking at the temptation, the problem, how serious it is, I don't want to walk in sin, but he's looking at the sin, he starts to fall. But he doesn't fall when he keeps his eyes fixed on Jesus. And when he does start to fall, he cries out, "Help me!" And guess what? Jesus comes to the rescue. And so for us, what that means here is we want to increase our times of prayer as much as possible. I want to encourage you in achieving your mission, increase your times of prayer. I met this pastor here. I think he's a pastor over 1,000 churches in Mexico. And I asked him, how do you sustain that? He said, the key thing for me is, John, I pray. And he said, I've never got up later than 6 in the morning. I pray from 6 till 9. And then at 9 o'clock, I begin my Bible study, and then I go on to the day. And he said, sometimes the Lord wakes me in the night and I pray through the night seasons. I could not do what I'm doing without a strong life of prayer. And that's it. That's what we want to be doing. As well as that, we've established a weekly prayer meeting here. A few people come along to that. There's some young people I'd arranged to meet up with, and they turned up 3 hours late. So they ended up having to come into that prayer meeting, which was not the plan. And one of them just starts weeping because he can feel the presence of God. And so prayer, we're worshiping with others as well. We've been along to different churches. There's a church I went to, Cristo Vive, Jesus Lives. And the worship there was pretty much just like YouTube and a guy at the front. And I started weeping because of the anointing in that place. And I'm like, why is this so anointed? The pastor gets up, he says this, he preaches from Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Lord's upon me to preach good news to the poor, set the captives free. You know that passage. And he says, wherever the focus is on setting people free and bringing them to salvation, you'll never lack the anointing and the presence of God. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's why the worship's so great. And there's something about that, just being around people, worshiping together, that helps keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. We have to do that here, and Bromley has to do that there. But it's not just prayer. It's coming into this awareness that Jesus is everywhere. So many of you know it's my practice to go on these prayer walks, and I'm going there looking to see him wherever I go. And so I can tell you cool stories. One time I was super discouraged, God, this is hard. Is this even possible? How am I going to do this? And I'm walking with God, just looking to see what he shows me. And I wasn't in Tepito. It was actually in another area of the city, but walking with God. And I see this. And it's this number plate of this motorbike. And it just says on it, ARC too. You know, we're sent by our church, the Ark, and we're looking to plant another church, which I guess is Ark 2, sort of. And not only that, the detail, the little, the name of the place it says on it is Morelos. Morelos is the colonia that Tepito is in. And so it's almost like, John, there you go. You got your address. Get on with it. It's what I've called you to do. Another time, walking with God in the market here, and and like some of the clothes markets, they're just chaotic. There's like mountains of clothes, secondhand clothes you have to kind of sift through. But I get there and I see this T-shirt, and the T-shirt just says on it, "You are so loved," in English. Now, those of you who don't know me or don't know these videos, I always sign them off saying, "You are so, so loved." Like, it's like my kind of catchphrase. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are the odds that this T-shirt would be here in English with my catchphrase? And so I was super pumped by that. And I talked to the lady and explained that I'm a pastor. She says, "Oh, I'm a Christian too." And she says, "Do you know what? At this point in Tepito in the market, every week, there's an outreach, an evangelistic outreach." So I'm like, oh my gosh, like, he's leading my steps. And so as we keep our eye on him, expecting to see him everywhere he guides, he leads. Not only that, it's this understanding that we don't just see him in these kind of weird signs, but he's in the faces of every person that we meet. So here's something cool. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus talks about, at the end, there'll be this separating out those who love Jesus and those who don't love Jesus, the sheep and the goats. And to the sheep, those who love him, he'll say to them, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was in prison and you visited me. And they'll say, like, when did we do that? And he'll say, whenever you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. In other words, what he's saying is, whenever you minister to another human being, it's an opportunity to minister to Jesus. In fact, I'd say it even stronger than that. There is an opportunity to encounter Jesus in the face of every single person that we meet. The homeless guy who lives outside here and does everything outside here, and he smells so bad. Like I was looking at him and I just noticed he had a bit of paper and he was drawing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, that guy's an artist. That guy's a prophet, potentially. And then another time I saw him reading, and I've got to know him. His name's Antonio. Pray for him. And I'm seeing, like, I see Jesus, the design of the Lord inside this man, that he needs to hear it and needs to see it manifest. Pray for my Spanish in that regard. Another time, you know, and I go out to buy burgers with Jesus, and I get talking to this guy who's like really a bit drunk and maybe something else. Like, his friend offered me some marijuana. I politely declined. And I got talking with him. I told him a little bit of my story. And he says, wow, he said, tú eres un padre, tú eres un padre. You're a father, you're a father. And I said, what's your name? He said, mi nombre es Ángel. I'm Angel. So I'm literally having an angel tell me I'm a father, which is exactly the calling that Jesus has given me in this place, to father the unparented. And so we meet Jesus when we see him everywhere, and we recognize he's everywhere, looking to communicate with us, looking to connect with us. He's the author, and he's the one that's carrying it on to completion. And like when there's been times when we've been absolutely overwhelmed, we've had to cry out to him, thank you for beginning this. We don't know what's going to happen next. How can these things be? I remember being in the room with the YWAM in Culiacán, another part of the city, and thinking, like, how on earth do we connect with Tepito? Like, it's a dangerous place. It's notorious for these drugs and gangs and kidnappings, all these different things. How on earth are we going to make these connections? We don't know anyone there. And I was praying to Jesus. And then I went out to the kitchen and meet one of the missionaries there, and she says, oh, I know people in Tepito. We go and meet those people in Tepito. I tell them my story. They start crying, and it turns out they've been praying that God would send someone to plant an incarnational church here in Tepito. And they're like, and you're a pastor. God sent a pastor. And I'm like, well, what do I do? And they said, well, move in. We've got an apartment here. We're moving out. You can move in. And so it's like, wow, he's the author and he's got the next steps, but we need to seek him for the next steps. A few weeks ago, I'm here in Tepito, the YWAM base that we're connected with. They're in another part of the city. And I'm like, but God, like, how do we reach out to the young people here? What do I do? And I was like feeling pretty desperate. And I called out to Jesus. Later on that day, I get a phone call from a charity called Young Life that we'd met months before. They used to have a work in Tepito, like a club for young people. But when they were threatened with kidnap by the cartel, like they fled, and that was right to do at that time. But like I'm praying, like, God, how do I connect? What's the vehicle to connect with the young people? That day they ring me and they say, look, the fact you've moved in there, it's a sign to us. Let's start the work again. And I'm like, no way! Jesus is the God of the next step. So we start going out there in the streets of Tepito with Young Life, Vida Joven, and we start playing basketball. I can't play basketball. I start throwing the basketball in people's faces and making terrible errors. But at the end of this game of basketball with these young people that show up to play with us, I'm asking their names, and one guy, he says, I'm Güero. And Güero basically means white man, and like if you've got a lighter shade of skin, they'll call you Güero as a kind of comedy. And then this other guy, he says, hey, pointing to me, he's more Güero than you are, Güero. And the guy like winks at me and he says, well, he looks at me and he says, yeah, he's my dad. And again, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's the calling. And now we've invited some of these guys from Tepito to go on a Young Life club. We went away with them for the weekend. They came wearing their satanic crosses. One guy with a goat on it. His like profile picture on WhatsApp is him stood outside the satanic temple with the goat demon representation of Satan. And they all prayed a prayer of salvation. Now for me, that's not everything. Like that's just the beginning. Like I don't put too much scope by that. But they're now meeting with us in our home. They've been meeting with us to do discipleship. And weekly now we're meeting with these guys to hang out with them, befriend them, and share stories about Jesus. But I want to be real with you. It is difficult being away from home and away from familiar circumstances and not always knowing the language. Here in Tepito, they actually whistle to each other and it's a whole language. I tried to join in and it turned out I was swearing at someone. There's all these kind of cultural challenges, the learning of a language, the building of a relationship, even this whole planting of a seed. I'm not naive. Not everyone that says, I give my life to Jesus follows through. We see that in the Bible with the book of Acts. Like Simon Magus, like gets baptized. He's following these guys, but not for the right motives. He's not a Christian. He's not going to be there in the end. So knowing it's this long-term hard work, sowing seeds, learning a language, building a relationship, paying the price in secret in prayer, how do we stay motivated? And how do you stay motivated in your calling? And I want to say it's the same answer. We have to be focused on the reward. We have to be reward-minded. And I want you to think about what that means for you, because I want to make this really clear. Successful ministry is not the reward. It's not. God spoke to Abraham and he said, I am your exceedingly great reward. Not Isaac, not like the breakthrough miracle pregnancy, not being the father of nations. I am your exceedingly great reward. With Moses, the reward for Moses wasn't the promised land. He never got there. He never went in. The reward was, you will serve me on this mountain. He got to know God face to face. I'm discipling this Mexican guy and I was trying to think, like, what's the one thing he needs to know? And obviously, like basic discipleship, you want to have a prayer life. You want to have a relationship with God like that. And I said to him, this is the real pleasure of Christianity. It's not praying so you get things. It's praying so you know someone. And in Matthew 7, Jesus at the end, he'll say to some people, like, they'll be like, Lord, Lord, we did all these miracles and we did this great ministry and we were so successful. And he'll say, I never knew you. The reward is knowing him in this journey. And that's what keeps us motivated when there's little fruit and maybe we're not even sure about that fruit. And sometimes we invite the person to the club and they don't come that day, or they come really late and we're not sure how serious their walk is. All these kind of questions, and like, we haven't got a church yet, we haven't got a building, we haven't even got anything, it's just a house thing. What? And all that insecurity, we weigh against that the joy and the pleasure of knowing him. That's the reward. And really, church people, that's what we're learning. Jesus is the way. He's the reward. He's the motivation. He's the one with the connect the dots, confirmations of what to do next. He's the whole journey, and he is the destination. That's what we're learning. Thank you so much for your prayers. Thank you for your giving. It's needed. Like, may God speak to you about that. It's really needed. Thank you so much for all of your support. Those of you in Bromley, I look forward to seeing you very, very soon. God bless you. Keep praying and never forget, you are so, so loved.
Hola,
Hola, Bromley. Saludos.